In addition to objective voter guides, which are clearly permissible, churches can also hold voter registration right there in the church. You can bring in a voter registration right there in the lobby and register your people to vote right there in church. You can encourage people from the pulpit to be engaged in the political process. In fact, one thing that Dr. Jerry Falwell has done in the past when he was alive at Thomas Road Baptist Church is distribute actual registrations to the people in the pews. He might, for example, say, everyone who is registered to vote, I want you to stand up. And a number of the people in the congregation would stand. All right, for those of you who are seated, I'm going to ask the ushers to come forward, and they're going to distribute these voter registration forms to you. And each one of them get a voter registration form. And then those forms are then, again, picked up by the ushers before these individuals leave. You can preach all you want to from the pulpit, but if your people in the pews are not registered, you're not going to make a difference in society. It's important to get your people registered to vote, and giving registration forms or having voter registration is certainly a permissible opportunity. Additionally, you can have forums where you invite candidates to your church, and those candidates can give information about their viewpoints. You can question them. You need to invite a broad range of candidates. Many of those candidates may not choose to show up. That's not your problem. As long as you've invited them, you can invite them and educate your people about these particular views. And pastors individually can support or oppose individual candidates for office. To do so, you can even put your title and your association or affiliation. So you could say Pastor John Doe, and underneath that you could say ABC Church. If you do that within a circular or a flyer or some kind of website that you're opposing or supporting a candidate, and you put your title as pastor and the affiliation or their church that you pastor with, then all you need to do is put an asterisk by that particular affiliation and title. And in the asterisk below, just say title and affiliation for identification purposes only. Therefore, you can be identified as a pastor with a certain church and clearly indicate your position with regards to political candidates in a publication. Pastors and churches can do an enormous amount of good by speaking out on these very important issues. Now is the time to speak out. Today is the day to speak and save the soul of America. In addition to political activity, in terms of what you can do many other things as well. And Liberty Counsel has information available in the form of a DVD that you can contact us at 1-800-671-1776. Or you can go to our website and you can get this particular information on a DVD. That's lc.org. Ask for a DVD regarding pastors, churches, and political activity, and we'll send this to you right away. We want to get this information out to as many people as possible so that we can liberate pastors and churches to be able to speak out on these important moral issues. Let's turn the corner for just a minute and talk not only about what pastors and churches can do with respect to political campaigning or supporting or opposing a candidate for office, but what churches can do with respect to lobbying or legislation. In 1934, the Internal Revenue Service Code was amended so that churches and other nonprofit organizations are now restricted in some respect in this following way. The IRS code says that you may not engage in more than a substantial amount of your overall activity towards lobbying. Well, what is lobbying? Lobbying would be supporting or opposing legislation, whether on the local, state, or national level. It would include a federal or state marriage amendment. So it says that you must not devote more than a substantial part of your overall activity towards lobbying. However, what the IRS says is indeed that 5% of your overall activity is clearly permissible, and 15% of your overall activity crosses the line. Again, understand, from 1934 to the present, not one church has ever lost its tax-exempt status for engaging in too much lobbying. And indeed, not one church who's voluntarily chosen to do so has ever lost its tax-exempt letter ruling from the IRS. Not one church since 1934. That being the case, why are we intimidated to speak out on these important issues that regulate our daily lives? With respect to the minimal 5%, let me give you this hypothetical. It'll illustrate how much churches can really do with respect to lobbying. Say, for example, a church operates only 4.5 hours a week and has absolutely no paid staff at all. The church opens up at 9 o'clock on Sunday and closes down at 12 o'clock, operating for only 3 hours. There's no volunteers, there's no preparation, and there's no paid staff. The church also has a midweek service, and it goes, say, from 7 o'clock in the evening till 8:30, so it adds another hour and a half. Again, it has only 4.5 hours of activity. 4.5 hours of activity means that each Sunday, 5% of 4.5 hours is 13.5 minutes. What that means is each Sunday, from the pulpit of a 30-minute or 40-minute sermon, a pastor could devote 13.5 minutes to legislation, to lobbying, to encouraging people to vote in favor of or against particular legislation, or to contact legislators with respect to legislation. 13.5 minutes every single week could be devoted toward lobbying. And that's at the minimal 5% level, not even at the higher 10% or even up to approaching the 15% level. Now, say, for example, the pastor now is employed full-time, and that pastor is employed for a 40-hour work week. Well, the overall activity now is 40 hours plus the 4 hours. And again, there's no volunteer time outside of the other church activities, and there's no preparation time. So assume it's only 44 hours. The 5% of that gives you much more time. Now, assume, like a normal church would do, that you actually have volunteers. These individuals prepare for Sunday school before they get to school, before they get to the church. Your pastor prepares before he gets to the pulpit to preach. Those activities also are included. Now broaden yourself out even further. You have not only a Sunday school, you have volunteers, you start to add additional paid staff. All of that accumulates into your overall activity. You may have a church school. All of that accumulates into your overall activity. So all of this begins to accumulate, and if you put 5% onto this, you could literally turn your pulpit into a political machine every single Sunday. Now, I know you don't want to do that because you want to preach the gospel, and you want to also show how that gospel impacts our culture with respect to some of these laws that regulate us. But the point is, you could, at the minimal 5% level, literally turn your Sunday service into a political machine and never even get close to this 5% level. Moreover, what happens if on one Sunday you don't say anything about lobbying? Well, then the next Sunday, take the hypothetical of 4.5 hours of total overall activity, you could devote 13.5 minutes times 2. Well, for 2 Sundays, you don't say anything. The third Sunday, 13.5 minutes times 3. It looks at your overall activity, not on a particular day, but over a longer period of time. So when election cycles are coming up or particular legislation, you could devote a lot of time to opposing or supporting particular pieces of legislation. And in other cycles, when there's not such hot burning issues to be addressing, you don't approach those issues, and therefore you're not expending time. Again, from 1934 to the present, not one church, not one, has ever lost its tax-exempt status for engaging in lobbying. You may be in a situation where your state is considering a marriage amendment, or where legislation is coming before the City Council regarding a sexual orientation non-discrimination policy, or where Congress, for example, is considering so-called hate crimes legislation, or including in the employment regulations sexual orientation as a protected status. Can churches talk about this? Absolutely. Can pastors preach? You bet. Can you get involved and contact your senators, your congressmen and women, your local representatives as well? Absolutely, you can do that. In fact, you must do that, I believe, to fulfill your God-given calling. God is the God of the entire universe. He's not bifurcated into a box in a church on Sunday only. And in fact, whenever these moral issues, such as whether we're going to elevate in this country a deviant sexual lifestyle to a preferred and protected status, is on the table, we must not be silent. We've got to speak up on these important issues. And you know, when we speak up, we can make a difference. That's why pastors, I encourage to remove the muzzle and replace the muzzle that some want to put on you with a megaphone. Preach your God-given biblical command to preach all of the Scriptures and show how those Scriptures impact our daily lives. As it relates again, let me just recap to political campaigning and political activity through lobbying. From 1954 to the present, when the IRS code was amended to prohibit endorsing or opposing candidates for office, not one church has ever lost its tax-exempt status. If a church were, for example, to make a mistake and cross the line and actually endorse a candidate or oppose a candidate and get a call from the IRS, all the church has to do in that situation is to back away from that line. One day doesn't make the next day the same. Sunday is different than Monday. What you do on one day, if you accidentally violated the law, means that you don't have to continue to violate the law in the future. So don't be intimidated about speaking out on these important issues. And again, with respect to lobbying, from 1934 to the present, not one church has ever lost its tax-exempt status for engaging in lobbying. I encourage you to speak out. Call Liberty Counsel at 1-800-671-1776 or visit us at the web. It's lc.org. That's lc.org. Liberty Counsel is a national religious liberty organization with offices in multiple states and volunteer affiliate attorneys all over the United States. We're here to give you guidance and help. When you call, ask for the DVD or the CD with regards to pastors, churches, and political activities. Just ask for information regarding churches and political activities, and we'll send this to you right away. Speak up. Now is the time to speak up on these important moral issues.